So, this is my second reading. Fair warning, everybody. A quick summary of the book so far. Eragon is farm boy. I want to say he's like 15 or 16. Lives with his uncle and cousin. He found a strange stone. He just got it to hatch for him, and he's raised it to a pretty decent age, he thinks. And so now he's gonna go back into town and try to talk to Braum, one of the traders, about it, because Braum gave a very emotional story about the Dragon Riders the last time he was in town. And at the end of the last book, pretty important detail, he could hear the dragon saying his name in his head. So they're like connected. Alright, so Chapter 7, Tea for Two. Roran and Eragon parted at the outskirts of Carvajal. Eragon walked slowly to Braum's house, engrossed in his thoughts. He stopped at the doorstep and raised his hand to knock. A voice rasped, "What do you want, boy?" He whirled around. Behind him, Braum leaned on a twisted staff, embellished with strange carvings. He wore a brown hooded robe like a friar. A pouch hung from the scuffed leather belt, clasped around his waist. Above his white beard, a proud eagle, nose hooked over his mouth, and dominated his face. He peered at Eragon with deep-set eyes, shadowed by a gnarled brow, and waited for his reply. "To get information?" Eragon said. "Roran is getting a chisel fixed, and I had free time, so I came to see if you could answer a few questions." The old man grunted and reached for the door. Eragon noticed a gold ring on his right hand. The light glinted off a sapphire, highlighting a strange symbol carved on its face. "You might as well come in. We'll be talking a while. Your questions never seem to end." Inside, the house was darker than charcoal, an acrid smell heavy in the air. Now, for a light. Eragon heard the old man move around. Then a low curse as something crashed to the floor. "Ah, here we go." A white spark flashed. A flame wavered into existence. Braum stood with a candle before a stone fireplace. Stacks of books surrounded a high-backed, deeply carved wooden chair that faced the mantel. The four legs were shaped like eagle claws, and the seat and back were padded with leather, embossed with a swirling rose pattern. That's a lot of detail for Braum's chair. Apparently it's going to be very important. It's like magical or something. A cluster of lesser chairs held piles of scrolls. Ink pots and pens were scattered across a writing desk. "Make room for yourself. But by the lost kings, be careful. This stuff is valuable." Eragon stepped over pages of parchment covered with angular runes. He gently lifted cracking scrolls off a chair and placed them on the floor. A cloud of dust flew into the air as he sat. He stifled a sneeze. Braum bent down and lit the fire with his candle. "Good. Nothing like sitting by a fire for conversation." He threw back his hood to reveal reveal hair that was not white, but silver. Ooh. Then hung a kettle over the flames and settled into the high-backed chair. "Now, what do you want?" He addressed Eragon roughly, but not unkindly. "Well," said Eragon, wondering how best to approach the subject, "I keep hearing about the Dragon Riders and their supposed accomplishments. Most everyone seems to want them to return, but I've never heard of tale of how they were started. where the dragons came from, or what made the riders special, aside from the dragons. Ah, a vast subject to tell about, grumbled Brom. He peered at Eragon alertedly. If I told you their whole story, we'd be sitting here when winter comes again. It'll have to be reduced to a manageable length. But before we start properly, I need my pipe. Eragon waited patiently as Brom tampered down the Cardus weed. He liked Brom. The old man was irascible at times, but he never seemed to mind taking time for Eragon. Eragon had once asked him where he came from, and Brom had laughed, saying, "A village, much like Carvajal, only not quite as interesting." Curiosity aroused, Eragon asked his uncle, but Garrow could only tell him that Brom had bought a house in Carvajal nearly 15 years ago, and had lived there quietly ever since. Brom used the tinderbox to light the pipe. He's using all sorts of things to light other things. Like, he's very effective about his fire. Maybe not, actually. He's got like 8 different fire sources. Why didn't he just use the candle on his pipe? No, that would have been a bit ridiculous, I guess. He's smoking wax next thing you know. But still, there's just so much fire in this room right now. He puffed a few times, then said, "There, we won't have to stop, except for the tea. Now, about the riders, or the shirt girl, as they are called by the elves. Where to start? They spanned countless years, and, at the height of their power, held sway over twice the Empire's land. Numerous stories have been told about them, most nonsense. If you believed everything said, you would expect them to have the powers of a god." He sneezed. It was canon. Scholars have devoted entire lives to separating these fictions from fact, but it's doubtful any of them will succeed. However, it isn't an impossible task. If we confine ourselves to the 3 areas you specified: how the riders began, why they were so highly regarded, and where dragons came from. I shall start with the last item. Eragon settled back and listened to the man's mesmerizing voice. Dragons have no beginning, unless it lies with the creation of Allegasia itself. And if they have an end, it'll be when this world perishes. For they suffer as the land does. They, the dwarves, and a few others, are the true inhabitants of this land. They lived here before all others, strong and proud in their elemental glory. Their world was unchanging until the first elves sailed over the sea on their silver ships. "Where did the elves come from?" interrupted Eragon. "And why are they called the fair folk? Do they really exist?" Brom scowled. "Do you want your original questions answered, or not? They won't be if you want to explore every obscure piece of knowledge." "Sorry," said Eragon. He dipped his head and tried to look contrite. "No, you're not," said Brom with some amusement. He shifted his gaze to the fire and watched it lick the underside of the kettle. "You must know, elves are not legend, and they are called the fair folk because they are more graceful than any of the other races. They are from what we call Eulalia, though none but they know what, or even where, it is. Now," he glared from under his bushy eyebrows to make sure there would be no more interruptions, "the elves were a proud race then, and strong in magic. At first, they regarded dragons as mere animals. From that belief rose a deadly mistake. A brash elven youth hunted down a dragon as he would a stag. a snag, and killed it. Outraged, the dragons ambushed and slaughtered the elf. Unfortunately, the bloodletting did not stop there. The dragons massed together and attacked the entire elven nation. Dismayed by the terrible misunderstanding, the elves tried to end the hostilities, but couldn't find a way to communicate with the dragons. Thus, to greatly abbreviate a complicated series of occurrences, there was a very long and very bloody war, which both sides later regretted. At the beginning, the elves fought only to defend themselves, for they were reluctant to escalate the fighting, but the dragons' ferocity eventually forced them to attack for their own survival. This lasted for 5 years, and would have continued for much longer, if an elf called Eragon hadn't found a dragon egg. Eragon blinked in surprise. "Ah, I see you didn't know of your namesake," said Brahm. "No." The tea kettle whistled stridently. "Why was I named after an elf?" "Then you should find this all the more interesting," said Brahm. He hooked the kettle out of the fire and poured boiling water into 2 cups. Handing one to Eragon, he warned, "These leaves don't need to steep long, so drink it quickly before it gets too strong." Eragon tried a sip, but scalded his tongue. Brahm set his own cup aside and continued smoking the pipe. No one knows why that egg was abandoned. Some say the parents were killed in an elven attack. Others believe the dragon purposely left it there. Either way, Eragon saw the value of raising a friendly dragon. He cared for it secretly, and, in the custom of the ancient language, named it Bidam. When Bidam had grown to a good size, they traveled together amongst the dragons and convinced them to live in peace with the elves. Treaties were formed between the 2 races. To ensure that war would never break out again, they decided that it was necessary to establish the Riders. At first, the Riders were intended merely as a means of communication between the elves and dragons. However, as time passed, their worth was recognized, and they were given even more authority. Eventually, they took the island Vrongard for their home and built a city on it, Doru Areva. Before Galbatorix overthrew them, the Riders held more power than all the kings in Algasia. Now I believe I have answered 2 of your questions. Yes, said Eragon absently. It seems like an incredible coincidence that he had been named after the first rider. For some reason his name did not feel the same anymore. What does Eragon mean? I don't know, said Brahm. It's very old. I doubt anyone remembers except the elves. And fortune would have to smile greatly before you talked with one. It is a good name to have, though. You should be proud of it. Not everyone has one so honorable. Eragon brushed the matter from his mind and focused on what he had learned from Brahm. There was something missing. I don't understand. Where were we when the Riders were created? We? Asked Brahm, raising an eyebrow. You know, all of us. Eragon waved his hands vaguely. Humans in general. Brahm laughed. We are no more native to this land than the elves. It took our ancestors another 3 centuries to arrive here and join the Riders. That can't be, protested Eragon. We've always lived in Palancar Valley. That might be true for a few generations, but beyond that, no. It isn't even true for you, Eragon, said Brahm gently. Though you consider yourself part of Garrow's family, and rightly so, your sire was not from here. Ask around, you'll find many people who haven't been here that long. This valley is old and hasn't always belonged to us. Eragon scowled and gulped at the tea. It was still hot enough to burn his throat. This was his home, regardless of who his father was. What happened to the dwarves after the riders were destroyed? No one really knows. They fought with the riders through the first few battles. When it became clear Galbatorix was going to win, they sealed all the known entrances to their tunnels and disappeared underground. As far as I know, not one has been seen since. And the dragons? What of them? Surely they weren't all killed. Brahm answered sorrowfully. That is the greatest mystery in Alagasia nowadays. How many dragons survived Galbatorix's murderous slaughter? He spared those who agreed to serve him, but only the twisted dragons of the Forsworn would assist his madness. If any dragons aside from Shuriken are still alive, they have hidden themselves so they will never be found by the Empire. So where did my dragon come from? Wondered Eragon. Were the Urgles here when the elves came to Alagasia? He asked. No, they followed the elves across the sea, like ticks seeking blood. Damn, Brahm. They were one of the reasons the riders became valued for their battle prowess and ability to keep the peace. Much can be learned from this history. It's a pity the king makes it a delicate subject, reflected Brahm. Yes, I heard your story the last time I was in town. Story! Roared Brahm. Lightning flashed in his eyes. If it is a story, then the rumors of my death are true, and you are speaking with a ghost. Respect the past, and you never know how it may affect you. Eragon waited until Brahm's face mellowed before he dared ask. How big were the dragons? A dark puma smoke swirled above Brahm like a miniature thunderstorm. Larger than a house, even the small ones had wingspans over 100 feet. They never stopped growing. Some of the ancient ones, before the Empire killed them, could have passed for large hills. Dismay swept through Eragon. How can I hide my dragon in the years to come? He raged silently, but kept his voice calm. When did they mature? Well, said Brahm, scratching his chin, they couldn't breathe fire until they were around 5 to 6 months old, which is about when they could mate. The older a dragon was, the longer it could breathe fire. Some of them could keep at it for minutes. Hey, welcome in, Chihuahua. Hope you're doing well. It has been a while. Great to see you, though. We're right in the middle of a tale from Brahm. He's describing where dragons came from. Eragon's trying to get some questions answered to help raise his own dragon. Glad you could pop by, though. Sorry about that, I had to blow my nose. There's a good intermission. So yeah, he's asking how big they get. He said as big as hills. He asked when they start getting older. He said like 5 to 6 months they breathe fire. I could just ask my dragon. I heard that their scales shone like gems. Brahm leaned forward and growled. You heard right. They came in every color and shade. It was said that a group of them looked like a living rainbow, constantly shifting and shimmering. But who told you that? Eragon froze for a second, then lied. A traitor. What was his name? Asked Brahm. His tangled eyebrows met in a thick white line. The wrinkles deepened on his forehead. Unnoticed, the pipe smoldered out. Eragon pretended to think. I don't know. He was talking in Morns, but I never found out who he was. I wish you had, muttered Brahm. He's also said a rider could hear his dragon's thoughts, said Eragon quickly, hoping that the fictitious traitor would protect him from suspicion. Brahm's eyes narrowed. Slowly he took out a tinderbox and struck the flint. Smoke rose, and he took a long pull from the pipe, exhaling slowly. In a flat voice he said, he was wrong. It isn't in any of the stories, and I know of them all. Did he say anything else? Eragon shrugged. No. Brahm was too interested in the traitor for him to continue the falsehood. Casually he inquired, "Did dragons live very long?" Brahm did not respond right away. Rocky said the biggest dragon can swallow galaxies. Whoa, that's heavy. Oh, in this one they can swallow pretty much any size building. If they're the size of like a mountain, dude, that's a gigantic, you know? They're gonna eat anything that humans have built, basically. It's like, Fantasia. You know that Fantasia, song? I can't think of what it's called. Oh, Night on Ball Mountain. That's my favorite one. With, the Chernobog. And it makes the souls of the people in the town below it dance at night. Great jam. So yeah, Brahm getting real suspicious of Eragon. Eragon needs to fall back a little bit. Clearly Brahm knows what he's talking about. Brahm did not respond right away. His chin sank to his chest while his fingers tapped the pipe thoughtfully, light reflecting off his ring. Sorry, my mind was elsewhere. Yes, a dragon will live for quite a while. Forever, in fact, as long as it isn't killed and its rider doesn't die. How does anyone know that? Objected Eragon. Dragons die when their riders do. They can only live to be 60 or 70. You said during your narration that riders live for hundreds of years, but that's impossible. It troubled him to think of outliving his family and friends. A quiet smile curled Brahm's lips as he said slyly, "What is possible is subjective. Some would say that you cannot travel through the spine and live, yet you do. It's a matter of perspective. You must be very wise to know so much at such a young age." Eragon flushed, and the old man chuckled. "Don't be angry. You can't be expected to know such things. You forget that the dragons are magical. They affected everything around them in strange ways. The riders were closest to them and experienced this the most. The most common side effect was an extended life. Our king has lived long enough to make that apparent, but most people attribute it to his own magical ability. You may not see them, but they are trillions of this dragon. You can only see the dark voids. Oof. I'll keep my eyes out. Or try to anyway. There are also other, less noticeable changes. All the riders were stronger of body, keener of mind, truer of sight than normal men. Along this, a human rider would slowly acquire pointed ears, though they were never as prominent as an elf's. Eragon has to stop his hand from reaching up to feel the tips of his ears. How else will this dragon change my life? Not only has it gotten inside my head, but it's altering my body? Were dragons very smart? Didn't you pay attention to what I told you earlier? Demanded Brahm. How could the elves form agreements and peace treaties with dumb brutes? They were as intelligent as you or I. But they were animals, persisted Eragon. Brahm snorted. They were no more animal than we are. For some reason, people praise everything the riders did, yet ignore the dragons, assuming that they were nothing more than an exotic mean to get from one town to another. They weren't. The riders' great deeds were only possible because of the dragons. How many men would draw their swords if they knew a giant fire-breathing lizard, one with more natural cunning and wisdom than even a king could hope for, would soon be there to stop the violence? He blew another smoke ring and watched it waft away. Brahm seems a little too informed on this subject for just a common trader, wouldn't you say? He's also getting very passionate. Did you ever see one? Nay, said Brahm. It was long before my time. And now for a name. I've been trying to recall the name of a certain dragon, but it keeps eluding me. I think I heard it when the traders were in Carvajal, but I'm not sure. Could you help me? Brahm shrugged and quickly listed a stream of names. There was Jura, Herodor, Fundor, who fought the giant sea snake, Galzra, Brium, Ohem the Strong, Gretium, Beruan, Rosalb. He added many others. At the very end, he nudged so softly, Eragon almost did not hear. And Saphira. Brahm quietly emptied his pipe. Was it any of those? I'm afraid not. Unbelievable. Eragon sounding hella sus. When I got my dragon, I started shedding skin. Oh, whoa. Or maybe I just never need to moisturize. Yeah. I would say moisturize and talk to your dragon. And maybe even your doctor about that. I would say both. For sure. With my limited knowledge, mind you. I'm certainly no Brahm. Brahm had given him much to think about, and it was getting late. Well, Roland's probably finished with Horst. I should get back though. I'd rather not. Brahm raised an eyebrow. What? Is that it? I expected to be answering your questions until he came looking for you. No queries about dragon battle tactics or requests for descriptions of breathtaking aerial combat. Are we done? For now, laughed Eragon. I learned what I wanted to, and more. He stood and Brahm followed. Very well then. He ushered Eragon to the door. Goodbye. Take care. And don't forget, if you remember who that traitor was, tell me. I will, thank you. Eragon stepped into the glaring winter sunlight, squinting. He slowly paced away, wondering about what he had heard. Page 56. A Name of Power. A page, chapter 8. I feel like that's a little bit more appropriate. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Chihuahua. Hope you're feeling better today. Allow me to read to you to get you through this unfortunate occurrence. After this, I think we're going to start doing the Goosebump series. I'll post in the Discord a huge index of my Goosebump books, and you guys can help me decide which one to start with. They're pretty short. I could do each one in a sitting in like a 2 or 3 hour video. I have a lot of them. But we gotta do Eragon first. So, chapter 8. On the way home, Roran said, there was a stranger from Therinsford at Horst today. What's his name? Asked Eragon. He sidestepped a patch of ice and continued walking at a brisk pace. His cheeks and eyes burnt from the cold. Dampton. He came here to have Horst forge him some sockets, said Roran. His stocky legs plowed through a drift, clearing the way for Eragon. Doesn't Therinsford have its own smith? Yes, replied Roran, but he isn't skilled enough. He glanced at Eragon. With a shrug, he added, Dampton needs the sockets for his mill. He's expanding it and offered me a job. If I accept, I'll leave with him when he picks up the sockets. Millers worked all year. During winter, they ground whatever people brought them, but in harvest season they brought grain and sold it as flour. It was hard, dangerous work. Workers often lost fingers or hands to the giant millstones. Are you going to tell Garrow? Asked Eragon. Yes. A grimly amused smile played across Roran's face. Sorry about that. You had to fight an owl for your dog, I think that is, right, Rocky? That's crazy. Well, I hope you're alright. Owls are no joke. Their talons are pretty big. No, good to hear it. So yeah. Warren's catching a grin. What for? You know what he thinks about us going anyway. It'll only cause trouble if you said anything. Forget about it. So we can eat dinner tonight in peace. I can't. I'm going to take the job. Eragon halted. Why? They faced each other, their breath visible in the air. I know money is hard to come by, but we always manage to survive. You don't have to leave. No, I don't. But the money is for myself. Roran tried to resume walking, but Eragon refused to budge. What do you need it for? Roran's shoulders straightened slightly. I want to marry. Bewildered in astonishment overwhelmed Eragon. He remembered seeing Katrina and Roran kissing during the trader's visit. But marriage? Katrina? He asked weakly, just to confirm. Roran nodded. Have you asked her? Not yet. But come spring when I can raise a house, I will. There's too much work on the farm for you to leave now, protested Eragon. Wait until we're ready for planting. No, said Roran, laughing slightly. Oh no. Spring's the time. I'll be needed the most. The ground will have to be furrowed and sown. The crops must be weeded. Not to mention all the other chores. No, this is the best time for me to go. When all we really do is wait for the seasons to change. You and Garrow can make do without me. If all goes well, I'll soon be back working on the farm. With a wife. Eragon reluctantly conceded that Roran made sense. He shook his head. But whether with amazement or anger, he knew not. I guess I can only wish you the best of luck. But Garrow may take this with ill humor. We will see. Oh, your bearded dragon? Oh, dude, that's awesome. That's pretty sweet. One of my friends had a bearded dragon. They were huge. They resumed walking, the silence a barrier between them. Eragon's heart was disturbed. It would take time before he could look upon this development with favor. When they arrived home, Roran did not tell Garrow of his plans, but Eragon was sure that he soon would. Eragon went to see the dragon for the first time since it had spoken to him. He approached apprehensively, aware now that it was an equal. Eragon, is that all you can say? He snapped. Yes. His eyes widened at the unexpected reply, and he sat down roughly. Now it has a sense of humor. What next? Impulsively, he broke a dead branch with his foot. Rowan's announcement had put him in a foul mood. A questioning thought came from the dragon, so he told it what had happened. As he talked, his voice grew steadily louder, till he was yelling pointlessly into the air. He ranted until his motions were spent, then ineffectually punched the ground. I don't want him to go, that's all, he said helplessly. The dragon watched, impassively listening and learning. Yeah, you could definitely help. I'm gonna make it a vote in the Discord. After this book, we're gonna do a couple of Goosebump books while I scour for the second Eragon book, because I only have the first, third, and fourth for some reason. Big sad. So Eragon's ranting and raving to his dragon. Dragon's just listening, because, you know, dragon's really not that old yet. Eragon mumbled a few choice curses and rubbed his eyes. He looked at the dragon thoughtfully. You need a name. I heard some interesting ones today. Perhaps you'd like one. He mentally ran through the list Brahmin had given him until he found two names that struck him as heroic, noble, and pleasing to the ear. What do you think of Vanalor, or successor, Eridor? Both were great dragons. No, said the dragon. It sounded amused with his efforts. Eragon. That's my name. You can't have it, he said, rubbing his chin. Well, if you don't like those, there are others. He continued through the list, but the dragon rejected every one he proposed. It seemed to be laughing at something Eragon did not understand, but he ignored it and kept suggesting names. There was Ingethold. He saw the revelation stopped him. That's the problem. I've been choosing male names. You are a she. Yes. The dragon folded her wings smugly. Now that he knew what to look for, he came with half a dozen names. He toyed with Myrmel, but that did not fit. After all, it was the name of a brown dragon. You don't look like a brown dragon. Come on, totally different breed. Ophelia and Lenora were also discarded. He was about to give up when he remembered the last name Brahm had muttered. Eragon liked it, but with the dragon? He asked, "Are you Saphira?" She looked at him with intelligent eyes. Deep in his mind, he felt her satisfaction. Yes. Something clicked in his head, and her voice echoed, as if from a great distance. He grinned in response. Saphira started humming. Alright, well, he's getting somewhere. Alright, chapter 9, A Miller to Be. The sun had set by the time dinner was served. A blustery wind howled outside, shaking the house. Eragon's eyed Roran closely and waited for the inevitable. Finally, I was offered a job at Therinsfold Mill, which I planned to take. Garrow finished his mouthful of food with deliberate slowness and laid down his fork. Oh, you know when the fork hits the table? That's some serious shit is about to be said. He leaned back in his chair, then interlaced his fingers behind his head and uttered one dry word. Why? Rowan explained why Eragon absently picked at his food. I see, said Garrow's only comment. He fell silent and stared at the ceiling. No one moved as they awaited his response. Well, when do you leave? What? Asked Rowan. Garrow leaned forward with a twinkle in his eye. Did you think I would stop you? I'd hoped you would marry soon. It would be good to see this family growing again. Katrina will be lucky to have you. Astonishment raced over Roran's face. Then he settled into a relieved grin. So, when do you leave? Garrow asked. Roran regained his voice. When Dempton returns to get the sockets for the mill. Speaking of returning voices, I'm like losing mine today. It's awful. Hang on one second. Alright. Sorry about that. But yeah, I feel like I'm getting so, like, raspy so quickly. Like, literally. I'll be alright, though. I mean, I am trying to do different voices and stuff, so. I guess I am, like, straining my voice, if you will. But still. Like, I should be over being sick already. I really don't feel that bad. But anyway, so Garrow's asking when Rowan's gonna leave. He said, when Dempton returns to get the sockets for the mill. You're enjoying? Hey, I appreciate it, Joel. I may have to stop occasionally because I'm like mildly dying for some reason, but we'll get there. And I feel like once I'm a few more chapters in, I'll be a little bit more adjusted. Garrow nodded, and that will be in 2 weeks. Good. That will give us time to prepare. It'll be different to have the house to ourselves, but if nothing goes amiss, it shouldn't be for too long. He looked over the table and asked, Eragon, did you know this? He shrugged ruefully. Not until today. It's madness. Garrow ran a hand over his face. It's life's natural course. He pushed himself up from the chair. All will be fine. Time will settle everything. For now, though, let's clean the dishes. Eragon and Roran helped him in silence. The next few days were trying. Eragon's temper was frayed, except for curtly answering direct questions. He spoke with no one. There were small reminders everywhere that Roran was leaving. Garrow making him a pack, things missing from the walls, and a strange emptiness that filled the house. It was almost a week before he realized that distance had grown between Roran and him. When they spoke, the words did not come easily, and the conversations were uncomfortable. Saphira was a balm for Eragon's frustration. He could talk freely with her. His emotions were completely open to her mind, and she understood him better than anyone. During the weeks before Rowan's departure, she went through another growth spurt. She gained 12 inches at the shoulder, which was now higher than Eragon's. Wow. So she's like a 6 foot tall dragon. He found that the small hollow where her neck joined her shoulders was a perfect place to sit. He often rested there in the evenings and scratched her neck while explaining the meanings of different words. Soon she understood everything he said and frequently commented on it. For Eragon, this part of his life was delightful. Saphira was as real and complex as any person. Her personality was eclectic and at times completely alien. Yet they understood each other, each on a profound level. Her actions and thoughts constantly revealed new aspects of her character. When she caught an eagle, that's kind of crazy. Just your dragon just murders an eagle. Like, oh my. Okay, well done. And instead of eating it, released it, saying, "No hunter of the sky should end his days as prey. Better to die in the wing than pinned to the ground." That's beautiful. Okay. I misgauged Saphira there for a minute. Eragon's plan to let his family see Saphira was dispelled by Roran's announcement and Saphira's own cautionary words. She was reluctant to be seen, and he, partially out of selfishness, agreed. The moment her existence was divulged, he knew that shouts, accusations, and fear would be directed at him. So he procrastinated. He told himself to wait for a sign that it was the right time. The night before Roran was to leave, Eragon went to talk with him. He stalked down the hallway to Roran's door. An oil lamp rested on a nightstand, painting the walls with warm flickering light. The bedroom posts cast elongated shadows on empty shelves that rose to the ceiling. Roran, his eyes shaded and the back of his neck tense, was rolling blankets around his clothes and belongings. He paused, then picked up something from the pillow and bounced it in his hand. It was a polished rock Eragon had given him a few years ago. Wait, you're telling me... Oh wait, he's like hucking it up in the air and catching it. I was gonna say, he's bouncing a rock off the ground, like, polished or not, this guy is like all powerful. Like, that's... that's incredible. Just destroying the floor. Like, check this out, Eragon. Roran started tucking it into the bundle, then stopped and set it on a shelf. A hard lump formed in Eragon's throat, and he left. Aw, he's like, you didn't take my rock. I'm not gonna show up my fucking dragon. Fuck you, cousin. Rocky is finally used to my kissing his forehead. Aw, that's adorable. But yeah, imagine you had a family member who was hiding a dragon from you just because you didn't take this polished rock they gave you from like childhood. I mean, the fact that he considered taking it and didn't just completely forget, that's a little bit more fucked up, but still. Get over yourself, Eragon. Strangers in Carver Hall, Chapter 10. Breakfast was cold. The tea was hot. Ice inside the windows had melted with the morning fire and soaked into the wood floor, staining it with dark puddles. Eragon looked at Garrow and Roran by the kitchen stove and reflected that this would be the last time he saw them together for many months. Roran sat in a chair, lacing his boots. His full pack rested on the floor next to him. Garrow stood between them with his hands stuck deep into his pockets. His shirt hung loosely. His skin looked drawn. Despite the young men's cajoling, he refused to go with them. When pressed for a reason, he only said that it was for the best. "Do you have everything?" Garrow asked Roran. "Yes." He nodded and took a small pouch from his pocket. Coins clinked as he handed it to Roran. "I've been saving this for you. It isn't much, but if you wish to buy some bauble or trinket, it'll suffice." You're gonna do that to your cousin? Just pretend you don't have a lizard just because they like were petty about something ridiculous. And then just mention it years down the road. "Thank you, but I won't be spending my money on trifles," said Roran. "Do what you will. It's yours," said Garrow. "I've nothing else to give you except the Father's blessing. Take it if you wish, but it is worth a little." Roran's voice was thick with emotion. "I would be honored to receive it." "Then do, and go in peace," said Garrow, and kissed him on the forehead. He turned and said in a louder voice, "Do not think that I have forgotten you, Eragon. I have words for both of you. It's time I said them. As you are entering the world, heed them, and they will serve you well." He bent his gaze sternly on them. "First, let no one rule your mind or body. Take special care that your thoughts remain unfettered. One may be a free man, and yet be bound tighter than a slave. Give men your ear, but not your heart. Show respect for those in power, but don't follow them blindly. Judge with logic and reason, but comment not. Consider none your superior, whether their rank or station in life. Treat all fairly, or they will seek revenge. Be careful with your money. Hold fast to your beliefs, and others will listen." He continued at a slower pace. "Of the affairs of love, my only advice is to be honest. That's your most powerful tool to unlock a heart or gain forgiveness. That is all I have to say." He seemed slightly self-conscious of his speech. He hoisted Roran's pack. "Now you must go. Dawn is approaching, and Dempton will be waiting." Roran shouldered the pack and hugged Garrow. "I'll return as soon as I can." "Good. But now go, and don't worry about us." They parted reluctantly. Eragon and Roran went outside, then turned and waved. Garrow raised a bony hand, his eyes grave, and watched as they trudged to the road. After a long moment he shut the door. As the sound carried through the morning air, Roran halted. Eragon looked back and surveyed the land. His eyes lingered on the lone buildings. They looked pitifully small and fragile. A thin finger of smoke trailing up from the house was the only proof that the snowbound farm was inhabited. Sorry about that. I'm gonna have to get some more water already soon. But it's taking a lot of hydration out of me, what can I say? Where was I? Nice pee you got there, Chihuahua. Of all the letters you could have dropped, it's a quite fine decision that was made. Alright, here we go. "There is our whole world," Roran observed somberly. Eragon shivered impatiently and grumbled, "A good one, too." Roran nodded, then straightened his shoulders and headed into his new future. The house disappeared from view as they descended the hill. It was still early when they reached Carvajal, but they found the smithy doors already open. The air inside was pleasantly warm. Balder slowly worked two large bellows attached to the side of a stone forge, filled with sparkling coals. Before the forge stood a black anvil and an iron-bound barrel filled with brine. From a line of neck-high poles protruding from the walls hung rows of items, giant tongs, pliers, hammers in every shape and weight, chisels, angles, center punches, files, laths, bars of iron waiting to be shaped, vises, shears, picks and shovels. Yeah, you get the idea. This is a metal worker. Horst and Dempton stood next to a long table. Dempton approached with a smile beneath his flamboyant red mustache. Roran, I'm glad you came. There's going to be more work than I can handle with my new grindstones. Are you ready to go? Roran hefted his pack. Yes. Do we leave soon? I have a few things to take care of first. We'll be off within the hour. Eragon shifted his feet as Dempton turned to him, tugging at the corner of his mustache. And you must be Eragon. I would offer you a job too, but Roran got the only one. Maybe in a year or two, eh? Eragon smiled uneasily and shook his hand. The man was friendly. Under other circumstances, Eragon would have liked him. But right then, he sourly wished that the miller had never come to Carvajal. Dempton huffed. Good, very good. He returned his attention to Roran and started to explain how a mill worked. They're ready to go, interrupted Horst, gesturing the table. You can take them whenever you want to. They shook hands. Then Horst left the smithy, beckoning to Eragon on the way out. Interested, Eragon followed. He found the smith standing in the street with his arms crossed. Eragon thrust his thumb back toward the miller and asked, What do you think of him? Horst rumbled. A good man. He'll do fine with Roran. He instantly brushed metal fillings off his apron, then put a massive hand on Eragon's shoulder. I had to turn the page for that. A massive hand. Lad, do you remember the fight you had with Sloane? If you're asking about payment for the meat, I haven't forgotten. No, I trust you, lad. What I wanted to know is if you still have that blue stone. Eragon's heart fluttered. What does he want to know? Maybe someone saw Saphira. Struggling not to panic, he said. I do. But why do you ask? As soon as you return home, get rid of it. Horst overrode Eragon's exclamation. Two men arrived here yesterday. Strange fellows, dressed in black and carrying swords. It made my skin crawl just to look at them. Last evening, they started asking people if a stone like yours had been found. They're at it again today. Eragon blanched. No one with any sense said anything. They know trouble when they see it, but I could name a few people who will talk. Dread filled Eragon's heart. Whoever had sent the stone into the spine had finally tracked it down. Or perhaps the Empire had learned of Saphira. He did not know which could be worse. Think! The egg is gone. It's impossible for them to find it now. But if they knew what it was, it'll be obvious what happened. Saphira might be in danger. It took all of his self-control to retain a casual air. Thanks for telling me. Do you know where they are? He was proud that his voice barely trembled. I didn't warn you because I thought you needed to meet those men. Leave Carvajal. Go home. Alright, said Eragon, to placate the smith. If you think I should. I do. Horst's face softened. I may be overreacting, but these strangers give me a bad feeling. It would be better if you stayed home until they leave. I'll try to keep them away from your farm, though. It may not do any good. The drink of champions. Eragon looked at him gracefully. He wished he could tell him about Saphira. I'll leave now, he said, and hurried back to Roran. Eragon clasped his cousin's arm and bade him farewell. Aren't you going to stay a while? Roran asked with surprise. Eragon almost laughed. For some reason, the question struck him so funny. There's nothing for me to do, and I'm not going to stand around until you go. Well, said Warren doubtfully, I guess this is the last time we'll see each other for a few months. I'm sure it won't seem that long, said Eragon hastily. Take care and come back soon. He hugged Roran and left. Horse was still in the street. Aware that the smith was watching, Eragon headed into the outskirts of Carvajal. Once the smithy was out of sight, he ducked behind a house and sneaked back through the village. Eragon kept to the shadows as he searched each street, listening for the slightest noise. His thoughts flashed to his room, where his bow hung. He wished that it was in his hand. He prowled across Carvajal, avoiding everyone until he heard a sibilant voice from around a house. Though his ears were keen, he had to strain to hear what was being said. When did this happen? The words were smooth, like oiled glass, and seemed to worm their way through the air. Underlying the speech was a strange hiss that made his scalp prickle. About 3 months ago, someone else answered. Eragon identified him as Sloane. Shade's blood, he's telling them. He resolved to punch Sloane the next time they met. A third person spoke. The voice was deep and moist. It conjured up images of creeping decay, mold, and other things best left untouched. Are you sure? We would hate to think you had made a mistake. If that was so, it would be most unpleasant. Eragon could imagine only too well what they might do. Would anyone but the Empire dare threaten people like that? Probably not. But whoever sent the egg might be powerful enough to use force with impunity. Yeah, I'm sure he had it then. I'm not lying. Plenty of people know about it. Go ask them. Sloane sounded shaken. He said something else that Eragon did not catch. They have been rather uncooperative. The words were derisive. There was a pause. Your information has been helpful. We will not forget you. Eragon believed him. Sloane muttered something. Then Eragon heard someone hurrying away. He peered around the corner to see what was happening. 2 tall men stood in the street. Both are dressed in long black cloaks that were lifted by sheaths poking past their legs. On their shirts were insignias intricately wrought with silver thread. Hoods shaded their faces, and their hands are covered by gloves. Their backs were oddly humped, as though their cloths were stuffed with padding. Eragon shifted slightly to get a better view. One of the strangers stiffened and grunted peculiarly to his companion. They both swiveled around and sank into crutches. Eragon's crutches. Yeah, they got on their crutches because suddenly their legs were broken. So yeah, they're crouched down. Eragon's breath caught. Mortal fear clenched him. His eyes locked onto their hidden faces, and a stifling power fell over his mind, keeping him in place. He struggled against it and screamed to himself, "Move!" His legs swayed, but to no avail. The strangers stalked toward him with a smooth, noiseless gait. He knew they could see his face now. They were almost at the corner, hands grasping at swords. Eragon! He jerked as his name was called. The strangers froze in place and hissed. Brahm hurried towards him from the side, head bare and staff in hand. The strangers were blocked from the old man's view. Eragon tried to warn him, but his tongue and arms would not stir. Eragon! Cried Brahm again. The strangers gave Eragon one last look and slipped away between the houses. Eragon collapsed to the ground, shivering. Sweat beaded on his forehead and made his palms sticky. The old man offered Eragon a hand and pulled him up with a strong arm. You look sick. Is all well? Eragon gulped and nodded mutely. His eyes flickered around, scratching for anything unusual. I just got dizzy, all of a sudden. It's past. It was very odd. I don't know why it happened. You'll recover, Brahm said. But perhaps it would be better if you went home. Yes, I have to get home. I have to get there before they do. I think you're right. Maybe I'm getting ill. But home is the best place for you. It's been a long walk, but I'm sure you'll be better by the time you arrive. Let me escort you to the road. I don't care what these haters got. Chocolate milk. Gonna take the pain away. Hell yeah. Let them enjoy their haterade. Eragon did not protest as Braum took his arm and led him away at a quick pace. Braum's staff crunched in the snow as they passed the houses. Why were you looking for me? Braum shrugged. Simple curiosity. I learned you were in town and wondered if you remembered the name of that traitor. Traitor? What's he talking about? Eragon stared blankly. His confusion caught the attention of Braum's probing eyes. No, he said, and then amended himself. I'm afraid I still don't remember. Braum sighed gruffly as if something had been confirmed, and rubbed his eagle nose. Well then, if you do, come tell me. I am most interested in this traitor who pretends to know so much about dragons. Eragon nodded with a distracted air. They walked in silence to the road, then Braum said, Hasten home. I don't think it would be a good idea to tarry on the way. He offered a gnarled hand. Eragon shook it, but as he let go, something in Braum's hand caught on his mitt and pulled it off. It fell to the ground. The old man picked it up. Clumsy of me. He apologized and handed it back. As Eragon took the mitt, Braum's strong fingers wrapped around his wrist and twisted sharply. His palm briefly faced upward, revealing the silvery mark. Braum's eyes glinted, but he let Eragon yank his hand back and jam it into the mitt. Goodbye. Eragon forced out, perturbed, and hurried down the road. Behind him he heard Braum whistling a merry tune. So, there we go. Confirming what was probably pretty obvious already. Braum got all his dragon knowledge firsthand, and that's why he's like, who's been lying to you, boy? Give me 30 seconds. I just want to go fill up my water. I'll be right back to continue chapter 11, Flight of Destiny. Sounds like things are going to be pretty serious. Alright, I'm back. And I see we got Best in here. Welcome on in, Best. Hope you're doing well, buddy. How are things? Drought nuts? Ew. It's a funny concept for a joke, but oh man, I do not want to eat no drought nuts. You're just in time for the start of a new chapter, chapter 11. Eragon just had a run-in with some very shady creatures who were pestering the butcher about him, and Brahm just helped him out, scared them off, but he's like, you should probably get home. So Eragon's rushing home. That's how we're gonna start this next chapter. It seems that some people found out that he had the stone that has now become a dragon, and they're not very happy about it, or they're looking for their dragon potentially. I'm doing awesome, thank you. Still not 100%, sadly. Feel like I keep losing my voice, but we're getting there. Feeling a lot better than I had been. And I'm loving this book. This is my favorite book. So, emotionally, I'm doing fantastic. And I appreciate you for asking. So, here we go. Flight of Destiny. Eragon's mind churned as he sped on his way home. He ran as fast as he could, refusing to stop even when his breath came in great gasps. As he pounded down on the cold road, he cast out with his mind for Saphira, but she was too far away for him to contact. He thought about what to say to Garrow. There was no choice now. He would have to reveal Saphira. He arrived home, panting for air and heart pounding. Garrow stood by the barn with the horses. Eragon hesitated. Should I talk to him now? He won't believe me unless Saphira's here. I better find her first. He slipped around the farm and into the forest. Saphira! He shouted with his thoughts. I come, was the dim reply. That's a weird way to reply, but okay, Saphira. With other words, he sensed her alarm. He waited impatiently, though it was not long before the sound of her wings filled the air. She landed amid a gout of smoke. What happened? She queried. He touched her shoulder and closed his eyes, calming his mind. He quickly told her what had occurred. When he mentioned the strangers, Saphira recoiled. She reared and roared deafeningly, then whipped her tail over his head. He scrambled back in surprise, ducking as her tail hit a snowdrift. Bloodlust and fear emanated from her in great sickening waves. Fire! Enemies! Death! Murderers! What's wrong? He put all of his strength into the words, but an iron wall surrounded her mind, shielding her thoughts. She let out another roar and gouged the earth with her claws, tearing the frozen ground. Stop it! Garrow will hear! Oaths betrayed, souls killed, eggs shattered, blood everywhere, murderers! Jeez, the dragon's going through it right now. R.I.P. Saphira. Frantic, he blocked out Saphira's emotions and watched her tail. When it flicked past him, he dashed to her side and grabbed a spike in her back. Clutching it, he pulled himself into a small hollow at the base of her neck and held on tightly as she reared again. Enough, Saphira, he bellowed. Her stream of thoughts ceased abruptly. He ran a hand over her scales. Everything's going to be alright. She crouched and her wings rushed upward. They hung there for an instant, then drove down as she flung herself into the sky. Eragon yelled at the ground as the ground dropped away and they rose above the trees. Turbulence buffeted him, snatching the breath out of his mouth. Saphira ignored his terror and banked towards his spine. Underneath, he glimpsed the farm and the Enora River. His stomach convulsed. He tightened his arms around Saphira's neck and concentrated on the scales in front of his nose, trying not to vomit. As she continued to climb, when she leveled off, he gained the courage to glance around. The air was so cold that frost accumulated on his eyelashes. They had reached the mountains faster than he thought possible. From the air, the peaks looked like giant razor-sharp teeth waiting to slash them to ribbons. Saphira wobbled unexpectedly, and Eragon heaved over her side. He wiped his lips, tasting bile, and buried his head against her neck. We have to go back, he pleaded. The strangers are coming to the farm. Garrow has to be warned. Turn around. There's no answer. He reached for her mind, but it was blocked by a barrier of roiling fear and anger. Determined to make her turn around, he grimly wormed into her mental armor. He pushed at its weak places, undermined the stronger sections, and fought to make her listen, but to no avail. Soon, mountains surrounded them, forming tremendous white walls broken by granite cliffs. Blue glaciers sat between the summits, like frozen rivers. Long valleys and ravines opened beneath them. He heard the dismayed screech of birds far below as Saphira soared into view. He saw a herd of woolly goats bounding from ledge to ledge on a rocky bluff. Eragon was battered by swirling gusts from Saphira's wings, and whenever she moved her neck, he was tossed from side to side. She seemed tireless. He was afraid she was going to fly through the night. Finally, as darkness fell, she tilted into a shallow dive. He looked ahead and saw that they were headed for a small clearing in a valley. Saphira spiraled down, leisurely drifting over the treetops. She pulled back as the ground neared, filled her wings with air, and landed on her rear legs. Her powerful muscles rippled as they absorbed the shock of impact. She dropped to all fours and skipped a step to keep her balance. Eragon slid off without waiting for her to fold her wings. He's just like, dude, I have been waiting for you to park your ass for like 15 hours. What the fuck? As he struck the ground, his knees buckled and his cheeks slammed against the snow. He gasped as excruciating pain seared through his legs, sending tears to his eyes. His muscles, cramped from clenching for so long, shook violently. He rolled onto his back, shivering and stretching his limbs as best he could. Then he forced himself to look down. 2 large blots darkened his wool pants on the insides of his thighs. He touched the fabric. It was wet. Alarmed, he peeled off the pants and grimaced. The insides of his legs were raw and bloody. The skin was gone, rubbed off by Saphira's hard scales. He gingerly felt the abrasions and winced. Cold bit into him as he pulled the pants back on, as he cried out as he scraped against the sensitive wounds. He tried to stand, but his legs would not support him. The deepening night obscured his surroundings. The shade mountains were unfamiliar. I'm in the spine. I don't know where. We're in the middle of winter, with a craze dragging, unable to walk or find shelter. I have to get back to the farm tomorrow. The only way to do that is by flying, which I don't think I can endure anymore. He took a deep breath. Oh, I wish Saphira could breathe fire. Yeah, this is not a good situation. Eragon gonna die in the first book? Question mark? Is that why this book is like a memoir to Eragon? That's why it's named Eragon. Grinding gold? In what game? That's cool. Glad you're enjoying the story so far. He turned his head and saw her next to him, crouching low to the ground. Put a hand on her head and found it trembling. The barrier in her mind was gone. Without it, her fear scorched through him. He clamped down on it and slowly soothed her with gentle images. Why do the strangers frighten you? Murderers, she hissed. Garrow is in danger and you kidnapped me on this ridiculous journey. Are you unable to protect me? She growled deeply and snapped her jaws. Ah, but if you think you can, why run? Death is a poison. He leaned on one elbow and stifled his frustration. Saphira, look where we are. The sun is down, and your flight has stripped my legs as easily as I would scale a fish. Is that what you wanted? No. Then why did you do it? He demanded. Through his link with Saphira, he felt her regret for his pain, but not for her actions. She looked away and refused to answer. The icy temperature deadened Eragon's legs. Although it lessened the pain, he knew that his condition was not good. He changed tact. I'm going to unfreeze unless you make me a shelter, or hollow so I can stay warm. Even a pile of pine needles and branches would do. She seemed relieved that he had stopped interrogating her. There is no need. I will curl around you and cover you with my wings. The fire inside me will stay the cold. Eragon let his head thump back in the ground. Fine, but scrape the snow off the ground. It'll be more comfortable. In answer, Saphira raised the drift with her tail, clearing it with one powerful stroke. She swept over the site again to remove the last few inches of hardened snow. He eyed the exposed dirt with distaste. I can't walk over there. You'll have to help me. Her head, larger than his torso, swung over him and came to rest by his side. He stared at her large, sapphire-colored eyes and wrapped his hands around one of her ivory spikes. She lifted her head and slowly dragged him to the bare spot. Gently, gently, stars danced in his eyes as he slid over a rock. But he managed to hold on. After he let go, Saphira rolled on her side, exposing her warm belly. He huddled against the smooth scales of her underside. Her right wing extended over him and enclosed him in complete darkness, forming a living tent. Almost immediately, the air began to lose its frigidity. He pulled his arms inside his coat and tied the empty sleeves around his neck. For the first time he noticed that hunger gnawed at his stomach, but it did not distract him from his main worry. Did he get back to the farm before the strangers did? And if not, what would happen? Even if I could force myself to ride Saphira again, it'd be at least mid-afternoon before we get back. The strangers could be there long before that. He closed his eyes and felt a single tear slide down his face. What have I done? Hypothetically, if I redeemed the 1v1, would you have to 1v1 me? Yeah, I'll do 1v1s now. I'll do a single 1v1 to break up the reading, if you like to do that. So we're on chapter 13, I think now? The Doom of Innocence. When Eragon opened his eyes in the morning, he thought the sky had fallen. An unbroken plain of blue stretched over his head and slanted to the ground. Still half asleep, he reached out tentatively and felt the thin membrane under his fingers. It took him a long minute to realize what he was staring at. He's like, wait a minute, did I fall asleep under a dragon again? Oh yeah, okay. That's fine. The sky normally isn't that blue, that's right. Just making sure. Took him, slowly, he pushed his legs out from his fetal curl, scabs cracking. Pain had subsided some from yesterday, but he shrank from the thought of walking. Burning hunger reminded him of his missing meals. He summoned the energy to move and pounded weakly on Saphira's side. Hey, wake up, he yelled. She stirred and lifted her wing to admit a torrent of sunshine. He squinted as the snow momentarily blinded him. Beside him, Saphira stretched like a cat and yawned, flashing rows of white teeth. Like a cat, huh? When Eragon's eyes adjusted, he examined where they were. Imposing and unfamiliar mountains surrounded them, casting deep shadows on the clearing. Off to one side, he saw a trail cut through the snow and into the forest, where he could hear the muffled gurgling of a creek. Groaning, he stood and swayed, then stiffly hopped to a tree. He grabbed one of its branches and threw his weight against it. It held, then broke with a loud crack. He ripped off the twigs, fit with one end of the branch under his arm, and planted the other firmly in the ground. He's literally the Tobey Maguire meme right now. My back! My back! Except it's... oh no, actually it's SpongeBob. My leg! My legs! With the help of his improvised crutch, he limped to the side, the iced-over creek. He broke through the hard shell and cupped the clear, bitter water. Sated, he returned to the clearing. As he emerged from the trees, he finally recognized the mountains and the lay of the land. This was where, amid deafening sound, Saphira's egg had first appeared. He sagged against the rough trunk. There could be no mistake, for now he saw the gray trees that had been stripped of their needles in the explosion. How did Saphira know where this was? She was still in the egg. My memories must have given her enough information to find it. He shook his head in silent astonishment. Saphira was waiting patiently for him. Will you take me home? He asked her. She cocked her head. I know you don't want to, but you must. Both of us carry an obligation to Garrow. He has cared for me, and, through me, you. Would you ignore that debt? What will be said of us in the years to come if we don't return? That we hid like cowards while my uncle is in danger? I can hear it now, the story of the rider and his craven dragon. There will be a fight, let's face it and not shy away. You are a dragon. Even a shade would run from you. Yet you crouch in the mountains like a frightened rabbit. Eragon meant to anger her, and he succeeded. A growl rippled in her throat as her head jabbed within a few inches of his face. She bared her fangs and glared at him, smoke trailing from her nostrils. He hoped that he had not gone too far. Her thoughts reached him, red with anger. Blood will meet blood. I will fight. Our words, our fates, bind us. But try me not. I will take you because of debt owed, but into foolishness we fly. Foolishness or not, he said into the air, there is no choice. We must go. He ripped his shirt in half and stuffed a piece in each side of his pants. Gingerly, he hoisted himself onto Saphira and took a tight hold on her neck. This time he told her, fly lower and faster. Time is of the essence. Don't let go, she cautioned him, then surged into the sky. Obviously. No, to be honest, I was going to send you to save my uncle and then just leap to my death. That was the game plan, Saphira. You caught me. They rose above the forest and leveled out immediately, barely staying above the branches. Eragon's stomach lurched. He was glad it was empty. Faster, faster, he urged. She said nothing, but the beat of her wings increased. He screwed his eyes shut and hunched his shoulders. He had hoped that the extra padding of his shirt would protect him, but every movement sent pangs through his legs. Soon, lines of hot blood trickled down his calves. Concern emanated from Saphira. She went even faster now, her wings straining. The land sped past, as if it were being pulled out from under them. Eragon imagined that to someone on the ground they were just a blur. By early afternoon, Palancar Valley lay before them. Clouds obscured his vision to the south. Carvajal was to the north. Saphira glided down while Eragon searched for the farm. When he spotted it, fear jolted him. A black plume with orange flames dancing at its base arose from the farm. Saphira, he pointed out. Get me down there, now. She locked her wings and tilted into a steep dive, hurtling groundward at a frightening rate. Then she altered her dive slightly as they sped to the forest. He yelled over the screaming air, Land in the fields! He yelled on tighter as they plummeted. Saphira waited until they were only 100 feet off the ground before driving her wings downward in several powerful strokes. She landed heavily, breaking his grip. He crashed to the ground, then staggered upright, gasping for breath. The house had been blasted apart. Timbers and boards that had been walls and roof were strewn across a wide area. The wood was pulverized as if a giant hammer had smashed it. Sooty shingles lay everywhere. A few twisted metal plates were all that remained of the stove. The snow was perforated with smashed white crockery and chunks of bricks from the chimney. Thick, oily smoke billowed from the barn, which burned fiercely. The barn animals were gone, either killed or frightened away. Uncle! Eragon ran to the wreckage, hunting through the destroyed rooms of Garrow. There was no sign of him. Uncle! Eragon cried again. Saphira walked around the house and came to his side. Sorrow breeds here, she said. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't run away with me. You would not be alive if we had stayed. Look at this, he screamed. We could have warned Garrow. It's your fault you didn't get away. He slammed his fist against the pole, splitting the skin on his knuckles. Like, come on, Eragon, you're already pretty beat up. Blood dripped down his fingers as he stalked out of the house. He stumbled to the path that led to the road and bent down to examine the snow. Several tracks before him, but his vision was blurry and he could barely see. Am I going blind? He wondered. With a shaking hand, he touched his cheeks and found them wet. A shadow fell on him as Saphira loomed overhead, sheltering him with her wings. Take comfort. All may not be lost. He looked up at her, searching for hope. Examine the trail. My eyes see only 2 sets of prints. Garrow could not have been taken from here. He focused on the trampled snow, the faint imprints of 2 pairs of leather boots headed toward the house. On top of those traces, the same 2 sets of boots leaving. And whoever had made the departing tracks had been carrying the same weight as when they arrived. You're right. Garrow has to be here. He leapt to his feet and hurried back to the house. I'll search around the buildings and in the forest, said Saphira. Eragon scrambled into the remains of the kitchen and frantically started digging through a pile of rubble. Pieces of debris that he could not have moved normally now seemed to shift on their own. Yeah, suddenly his legs worked. A cupboard, mostly intact, stymied him for a second. Then he heaved and sent it flying. As he pulled on a board, something rattled behind him. He spun around, ready for an attack. A hand extended from under a section of collapsed roof. It moved weakly and grasped it with a cry. Uncle, can you hear me? There was no response. Eragon tore at pieces of wood, heedless of the splinters that pierced his hands. He quickly exposed an arm and shoulder was barred by a heavy beam. He threw his shoulder at it and shoved with every fiber, but it defied his efforts. Saphira, I need you. She came immediately. Wood cracked under her feet as she crawled over the ruined walls. Without a word, she nosed past him and set her side against the beam. Her claws sank into what was left of the floor. Her muscles strained. With a grating sound, the beam lifted, and Eragon rushed under it. Garrow lay on his stomach, his clothes mostly torn off. Eragon pulled him out of the rubble. As soon as they were clear, Saphira released the beam, leaving it to crash to the floor. Eragon dragged Garrow out of the destroyed house and eased him to the ground. Dismayed, he touched his uncle gently. His skin was gray, lifeless and dry, as if a fever had burned off any sweat. His lips were split, and there was a long scrape on his cheekbone. But that was not the worst. Deep, ragged burns covered most of his body. They were chalky white and oozed clear liquid. A cloying, sickening smell hung over him. His breath came in short jerks. Murderers, hissed Saphira. Don't say that. He can still be saved. We have to get him to... Gertrude? I can't carry him to Garvahal, though. Saphira presented an image of Garrow hanging under her while she flew. Can you lift us both? I must. Eragon dug through the rubble under until he found a board and leather thongs. Leather thongs. He had Saphira pierce a hole with the claw at each of the board's corners. Then he looped a piece of leather through each hole and tied them to her forelegs. After checking to make sure the knots were secure, he rolled the Garrow onto the board and lashed him down. As he did, a scrap of black cloth fell from his uncle's hand. It matched the stranger's clothing. He angrily stuffed it in his pocket, mounted Saphira, and closed his eyes as his body settled into a steady throb of pain. Now! She leapt up, hind legs digging into the ground. Her wings clawed at the air as she slowly climbed. Tendons strained and popped as she battled gravity. For a long, painful second, nothing happened. But then she lunged forward, powerfully, and they rose higher. Once they were out of the forest, Eragon told her, Follow the road. It'll give you enough time if you have to land. I might be seen. It doesn't matter anymore. She argued no further as she veered to the road and headed for Carvajal. Garrow swung wildly underneath them. Only the slender leather cords kept him from falling. The extra weight slowed Saphira. Before long, her head sagged and there was froth at her mouth. She struggled to continue. Yet there was almost a league from Carvajal when she locked her wings and sank toward the road. Her hind feet touched with a shower of snow. Eragon tumbled off her, landing heavily on his side to avoid hurting his legs. He struggled to his feet and worked to untie the leather from Saphira's legs. Find a safe place to rest, he said. I don't know how long I'll be gone, so you're gonna have to take care of yourself for a while. I will wait, she said. He gritted his teeth and began to drag Garrow down the road. The first few steps sent an explosion of agony through him. I can't do this, he hollered at the sky, then took a few more steps. His mouth locked into a snarl. He stared at the ground between his feet as he forced himself to hold a steady pace. It was a fight against his unruly body, a fight he refused to lose. The minutes crawled by at an excruciating rate. Each yard he covered seemed many times that. With desperation, he wondered if Carval still existed or if the strangers had burned it down too. After a time, though, a haze of pain, he heard shouting and looked up. Brahm was running toward him. Eyes large, hair awry, and one side of his head caked with dried blood. He waved his arms wildly before dropping his staff and grabbing Eragon's shoulders, saying something in a loud voice. Eragon blinked uncomprehendingly. Without warning, the ground rushed up to meet him. He tasted blood, then blacked out. Oof. What a way to end the chapter, huh? I need to run off just to the restroom real quick. Give me like 30 seconds, and then we're going to begin the next chapter, Death Watch. I definitely got a handful of chapters left in. So unfortunately, it's preoccupied. So we're gonna get another chapter in, and then I'm gonna run off. This one seems like a pretty short chapter too, which is nice. 9 pages. So Death Watch. Dreams roiled in Eragon's mind, breeding and living by their own laws. He watched as a group of people on proud horses approached a lonely river. Many had silver hair and carried tall lances. A strange, fair ship waited for them. Shining under a bright moon, the figures slowly boarded the vessel. 2 of them, taller than the rest, walked arm in arm. Their faces were obscured by cowls, but he could tell that one was a woman. They stood on the deck of the ship and faced the shore. A man stood alone on the pebble beach, the only one who had not boarded the ship. He threw back his head and let out a long, aching cry. As it faded, the ship gilded down the river, without a breeze or oars, out into the flat, empty land. The vision clouded, but just before it disappeared, Eragon glimpsed 2 dragons in the sky. That's an interesting dream. Eragon was first aware of the creakings, back and forth, back and forth. The persistent sound made him open his eyes and stare at the underside of a thatched roof. A rough blanket was draped over him, concealing his nakedness. Someone had bandaged his legs and tied a clean rag around his knuckles. And apparently also stripped him. They didn't bother to put his clothes back on after bandaging him up. A little awkward, but okay. Like, bitch, it's winter, what the fuck? It's probably what woke him up. He was in a single-room hut. A mortar and pestle sat on a table. with bowls and plants. Rows of dried herbs hung from the walls and suffused the air with strong, earthy aromas. Flames writhed inside a fireplace, before which sat a rotund woman in a wicker rocking chair, the town healer, Gertrude. Her head lolled, her eyes closed. A pair of knitting needles and a ball of wool thread rested in her lap. Tried to read those words at the same time and totally confused me. Though Eragon felt drained of willpower, he made himself sit up. That helped to clear his mind. He sifted through his memories of the last 2 days. His first thought was of Garrow, and his second was of Saphira. I hope she's in a safe place. He tried to contact her but could not. Wherever she was, it was far from Carvajal. At least Brom got me to Carvajal. I wonder what happened to him. There was all that blood. Gertrude stirred and opened her sparkling eyes. "Oh," she said, "you're awake. Good." Her voice was rich and warm. "How do you feel?" "Well enough. Where's Garrow?" Gertrude dragged a chair close to the bed. "Over at Horst's. There wasn't enough room to keep both of you here. And let me tell you, it's kept me on my toes, having to run back and forth, checking to see if the two of you were all right." Eragon swallowed his words and asked, "How is he?" There was a long delay as she examined her hands. "Not good. He has a fever that refuses to break, and his injuries aren't healing. I have to see him." He tried to get up. "Not until you eat," she said sharply, pushing him down. "I didn't expect all this time sitting by your side so you can get back up and hurt yourself. Half the skin of your legs was torn off, and your fever broke only last night. Don't worry yourself about Garrow. He'll be fine. He's a tough man." Gertrude hung a kettle over the fire. They began chopping parsnips for soup. "How long have I been here?" 2 full days. 2 days! That meant his last meal had been 4 mornings ago. Just thinking about it made Eragon's stomach weak. Saphira's been on her own this entire time. I hope she's alright. "The whole town wants to know what happened. They sent men down to your farm and found it destroyed." Eragon nodded. He expected that. "Your barn was burnt down. Is that how Garrow was injured?" I don't know," said Eragon. "I wasn't there when it happened." "Well, no matter. I'm sure it'll all get untangled." Gertrude resumed knitting while the soup cooked. "That's quite a scar on your palm." He reflexively clenched his hand. "Yes." "How did you get it?" Several possible answers came to mind. He chose the simplest one. "I've had it ever since I can remember. I never asked Garrow where it came from." The silence remained unbroken until the soup reached a rolling boil. Gertrude poured it in a bowl and handed it to Eragon with a spoon. He accepted it gratefully and took a cautious sip. It was delicious. When he finished, he asked, "Can I visit Garrow now?" Gertrude sighed. "You're a determined one, aren't you? Well, if you really want to, I won't stop you. Put on your clothes and we'll go." She turned her back as he struggled into his pants, wincing as they dragged over the bandages, and then slipped on his shirt. Gertrude helped him stand. His legs were weak, but they did not pain him like before. "Take a few steps," she commanded, then dryly observed, "At least you won't have to crawl there." Outside, a blustery wind blew smoke from the adjacent buildings into their faces. Storm clouds hid the spine and covered the valley, while a curtain of snow advanced toward the village, obscuring the foothills. Eragon leaned heavily on Gertrude as they made their way through Carvajal. Horst had built his 2-story house on a hill so he could enjoy a view of the mountains. He had lavished all of his skill on it. The shale roof shadowed a railed balcony that extended from a tall window on the 2nd floor. Each water spout was a snarling gargoyle, and every window and door was framed by carvings of serpents, hearts, ravens, and knotted vines. The door was opened by Elaine, Horst's wife, a small, willowy woman with refined features and silky blonde hair pinned in a bun. Her dress was demure and neat, and her movement graceful. Not gonna lie, I wasn't prepared to voice another character already. Please, come in, she said softly. They stepped over the threshold into a large, well-lit room. A staircase with a polished balustrade curved down to the floor. I have no idea what that is. The walls were the color of honey. Elaine gave Eragon a sad smile, but addressed Gertrude. I was just about to send for you. He isn't doing well. You should see him right away. Elaine, you'll have to help Eragon up the stairs, Gertrude said, then hurried up them, two at a time. It's okay, I can do it myself. Are you sure? Asked Elaine. He nodded, but she looked doubtful. Well, as soon as you're done, come visit me in the kitchen. I'll have a fresh baked pie you might enjoy. As soon as they left, he sagged against the wall, welcoming the support. Then he started up the stairs, one painful step at a time. When he reached the top, he looked down a long hallway, dotted with doors. The last one was open slightly. Taking a breath, he lurched towards it. Katrina stood by a fireplace, boiling rags. She looked up, murmured a condolence, and then returned to her work. Gertrude stood beside her, grinding herbs for a poultice. A bucket by her feet held snow melting in ice water. Your boy is now drowning commissions. Hey, that's awesome, Joel. Congrats, buddy. Garrow lay on a bed, piled high with blankets. Sweat covered his brow, and his eyeballs flickered blindly under their lids. The skin on his face was shrunken like a cadaver's. He was still, save for subtle tremors from his shallow breathing. Eragon touched his uncle's forehead with a feeling of unreality. He at the edge of the blankets and saw that Garrow's many wounds were bound with strips of cloth. Where the bandages were being changed, the burns were exposed to the air. They had not begun to heal. Eragon looked at Gertrude with hopeless eyes. Can't you do anything about these? She pressed the rag into the bucket of ice water, then draped the cool cloth over Garrow's head. I've tried everything. Salves, poultices, tinctures, but nothing works. If the wound's closed, he would have a better chance. Still, things may turn for the better. He's hardy and strong. Eragon moved to a corner and sank to the floor. This isn't the way things are supposed to be. Silence swallowed his thoughts. He stared blankly at the bed. After a while, he noticed Katrina kneeling beside him. She put an arm around him. When he did not respond, she diffidently left. Sometime later, the door opened, and Horst came in. He talked to Gertrude in a low voice, then approached Eragon. Come on, you need to get out of here. Before Eragon could protest, Horst dragged him to his feet and shepherded him out the door. I want to stay, he complained. You need a breath of fresh air. Don't worry, you can go back soon enough, consoled Horst. Eragon grudgingly let the smith help him downstairs into the kitchen. Heady smells from half a dozen dishes. Jeez, I can't read sometimes. Rich with spices and herbs filled the air. Albriec and Baldur were there, talking with their mother as she kneaded bread. The brothers fell silent as they saw Eragon, but he had heard enough to know that they were discussing Garrow. Here, sit down, said Gorst, offering a chair. Eragon sank into it gratefully. Thank you. His hands were shaking slightly, so he clasped them in his lap. A plate piled high with food was set before him. You don't have to eat, said Elaine, but it's there if you want. She returned to her cooking as he picked up a fork. He could barely swallow a few bites. How do you feel? Asked Horst. Terrible. The smith waited a moment. I know this isn't the best time, but we need to know. What happened? I don't really remember. Eragon, said Horace, leaning forward. I was one of the people who went out to your farm. Your house didn't just fall apart. Something tore it to pieces. Surrounding it were tracks of a gigantic beast I've never seen nor heard of before. Others saw them too. Now, if there's a shade or a monster roaming around, we have to know. You're the only one who can tell us. Also, the kitten started copyrighting Rocky. Sorma hoodie. There you go, that's adorable. Eragon knew he had to lie. When I left Carvajal, he counted up the time. 4 days ago, there were strangers in town asking about a stone like the one I found. He gestured to Horst. He talked to me about them, and because of that, I hurried home. All eyes were upon him. He licked his lips. Nothing happened that night. The next morning, I finished my chores and went walking in the forest. Before long, I heard an explosion and saw smoke above the trees. I rushed back as fast as I could, but whoever did it was already gone. I dug through the wreckage and found Garrow. So then you put him on the plank and dragged him back? Asked Albric. Yes, said Eragon. Before I left, I looked at the path to the road. There are 2 pairs of tracks on it. Both of them men's. Is he assuming gender based on footprint? That's interesting. He dug in his pocket and pulled out the scrap of black fabric. This was clenched in Garrow's hand. I think it matched what those strangers were wearing. He set it on the table. It does, said Horst. He looked both thoughtful and angry. And what of your legs? How were they injured? I'm not sure, Eragon said, shaking his head. I think it happened when I dug Garrow out. But I don't know. It wasn't until the blood started dripping down my legs that I noticed it. That's horrible, exclaimed Elaine. We should pursue those men, stated Albric haughtily. They can't get away with this. With a pair of horses, we could catch them tomorrow and bring them back here. Put that foolishness out of your head. They could probably pick you up like a baby and throw you in a tree. Remember what happened to the house? We don't want to get in the way of those people. Besides, they have what they want now. He looked at Eragon. They did take the stone, didn't they? It wasn't in the house. Then there's no reason for them to return now that they have it. He gave Eragon a piercing look. He didn't mention anything about those strange tracks. Do you know where they came from? Eragon shook his head. I didn't see them. Balder abruptly spoke. I don't like this. Too much of this rings of wizardry. Who are those men? Are they shades? Why do they want the stone? And how could they have destroyed the house except with dark power? You might be right, Father. The stone might be all they wanted, but I think we'll still see them again. Silence followed his words. Something had been overlooked, though. Eragon was not sure what. Then it struck him, with a sinking heart. He voiced his suspicion. Roran doesn't know, does he? How could I have forgotten him? Horace shook his head. He and Dempton left a little while after you. Unless they ran into some difficulty on the road. They've been in Theransford for a couple of days now. We were going to send a message, but the weather was too cold yesterday and the day before. Balder and I were about to leave when they woke you up, offered Albric. Horst ran ahead through his beard. Go on, both of you. I'll help you saddle the horses. Balder turned to Eragon. I'll break it to him gently. Promised, then followed Horst and Albric out of the kitchen. Eragon remained at the table, his eyes focused on a knot in the wood. Every excruciating detail was clear to him. The twisting grain, an asymmetrical bump, 3 little ridges with a fleck of color. The knot was filled with endless detail. The closer he looked, the more he saw. He searched for answers in it, but if there were any, they eluded him. Alright, I'm going to leave off there and run to the bathroom. Bear with me just a minute. Almost done with this chapter. Oh yeah, none of those are gonna appear on there. I think this one will though. Yeah. Alright, I've returned. A faint call broke through the pounding thoughts. It sounded like yelling from outside. He ignored it. Let someone else deal with it. Several minutes later, he heard it again, louder than before. Angrily, he blocked it out. Why can't they be quiet? Garrow's resting. He glanced at Elaine, but she did not seem to be bothered by the noise. Eragon! The roar was so strong, he almost fell out of the chair. He peered around him in alarm, but nothing had changed. He suddenly realized that the shouts were inside his head. Saphira? He asked anxiously. There was a pause. Yes, stone ears. Relief seeped into him. Where are you? She sent him an image of a small clump of trees. I tried to contact you many times, but you're beyond reach. I was sick, but I'm better now. Why couldn't I sense you earlier? After 2 nights of waiting, hunger bested me. I had to hunt. Did you catch anything? A young buck. He was wise enough to guard against the predators of land, but not those of sky. When I first caught him in my jaws, he kicked vigorously and tried to escape. I was stronger, though, and when defeat became unavoidable, he gave up and died. Does Garrow also fight the inevitable? Whoa. Saphira, pretty grim. I don't know, he told her the particulars, then said, it'll be a long time, if ever, before we can go home. I won't be able to see you for at least a couple of days. You might as well make yourself comfortable. Unhappily, she said, I will do as you say, but do not take long. They parted reluctantly. He looked out a window, surprised to see that the sun had set. Feeling very tired, he limped to Elaine, who was wrapping meat piles with oilcloth. I'm going back to Gertrude's house to sleep, he said. She finished with the packages and asked, why don't you stay with us? You'll be closer to your uncle, and Gertrude can have her bed back. Do you have enough room? He asked, wavering. Of course, she wiped her hands. Come with me. I'll get everything ready. She escorted him upstairs to an empty room. He sat on the edge of the bed. Do you need anything else? She asked. He shook his head. In that case, I'll be downstairs. Call me if you need help. He listened as she descended the stairs. Then he opened the door and slipped down the hallway to Garrow's room. Gertrude gave him a small smile over her darting knitting needles. How is he? Whispered Eragon. Her voice rasped with fatigue. He's weak, but the fever's gone down a little, and some of the burns look better. We'll have to wait and see, but this could mean he'll recover. That lightened Eragon's mood, and he returned to his room. The darkness seemed unfriendly as he huddled under the blankets. Eventually, he fell asleep, healing the wounds his body and soul had suffered. The madness of life. It was dark when Eragon jolted upright in bed, breathing hard. At noon, the room was chilly. Goosebumps formed on his arm and shoulders. The Goosebumps theme. Reader beware, you're in for a scare. Anyway, it was a few hours before dawn, the time when nothing moves and life waits for the first warm touches of sunlight. His heart pounded as a terrible premonition gripped him. It felt like a shroud lay over the world, and its darkest corner was over his room. He quietly got out of bed and dressed. With apprehension, he hurried down the hall. Alarm shot through him when he saw the door to Garrow's room open and people clustered inside. Garrow lay peacefully on the bed. Oh, hey, welcome in, Grave Mind Zone. Hope you're doing well, buddy. I appreciate the lurk. we do have some stuff going down pretty deep in this book now. So if you're not caught up, may not be the best time to be lurking. Just a fair warning. But I really appreciate you for popping by. And I definitely implore you to check out the previous video if you haven't. But he was dressed in clean clothes, his hair had been combed back, and his face was calm. He might have been sleeping, if not for the silver amulet clasped around his neck, and the sprig of dried hemlock on his chest, the last gifts from the living to the dead. Katrina stood next to the bed, face pale and eyes downcast. He heard her whisper, "I had hoped to call him father one day." Call him father, he thought bitterly. A right even I don't have. He felt like a ghost, drained of all vitality. Everything was insubstantial, except for Garrow's face. Tears flooded Eragon's cheeks. He stood there, shoulders shaking, but did not cry out. Mother, aunt, uncle, he'd lost them all. The weight of his grief was crushing, a monstrous force that left him tottering. Someone led him back to his room, uttering consolations. He fell on the bed, wrapped his arms around his head, and sobbed convulsively. He felt Saphira contact him, but he pushed her aside and let himself be swept away by sorrow. He could not accept that Garrow was gone. If he did, what was left to believe in? Only a merciless, uncaring world that snuffed lives like candles before wind. Frustrated and terrified, he turned his tear-dampened face toward the heavens and shouted, "What god would do this? Show yourself!" He heard people running to his room, but no answer came from above. He didn't deserve this. Comforting hands touched him, and he was aware of Elaine, sitting next to him. She held him as he cried, and eventually, exhausted, he slipped unwillingly into sleep. That was a short but pretty painful chapter. So I believe this is 15, A Rider's Blade. Anguish enveloped Eragon as he awoke. Though he kept his eyes closed, they could not stop a fresh flow of tears. He searched for some idea or hope to help keep him sane. "I can't live with this," he moaned. "Then don't," Saphira's words reverberated in his head. "How? Garrow is gone forever, and in time I must meet the same fate. Love, family, accomplishments, they are all torn away, leaving nothing. What is the worth of anything we do? The worth is in the act. Your worth halts when you surrender the will to change and experience life. But options are before you. Choose one and dedicate yourself to it. The deeds will give you new hope and purpose. But what can I do? The only true guide is your heart. Nothing less than its supreme desire can help you." She left him to ponder her statements. Eragon examined his emotions. It surprised him that more than grief, he found a searing anger. "What do you want me to do? Pursue the strangers?" "Yes." Her frank answer confused him. He took a deep, trembling breath. "Why?" "Remember what you said in the spine? How you reminded me of my duty as a dragon? And I returned with you despite the urging of my instinct? So too must you control yourself. I thought long and deep the past few days, and I realized what it means to be dragon and rider. It is our destiny to attempt the impossible." I read that as like 5 different words. "To accomplish great deeds regardless of fear. It is our responsibility to the future." "I don't care what you say. Those aren't reasons to leave," cried Eragon. "Then here are others. My tracks have been seen, and people are alert to my presence. Eventually, I will be exposed. Besides, there is nothing here for you. No farm, no family, and—" "Roran's not dead," he said vehemently. "But if you stay, you'll have to explain what really happened. He has a right to know how and why his father died. What might he do once he knows of me?" Saphira's arguments whirled around to Eragon's head, but he shrank from the idea of forsaking Palacorn Valley. It was his home, yet the thought of enacting vengeance on the strangers was fiercely comforting. Am I strong enough for this? You have me. Doubt besieged him. It would be such a wild, desperate thing to do. Contempt for his indecision rose, and a harsh smile danced on his lips. Saphira was right. Nothing mattered anymore, except the act itself. The doing is the thing, and what would give him more satisfaction than hunting down the strangers? A terrible energy and strength began to grow in him. He grabbed his emotions and forged them into a solid bar of anger, with one word stamped on it: revenge. His head pounded as he said with conviction, I will do it. He severed the contact with Saphira and rolled out of bed, his body tense like a coiled spring. It was still early morning. He had only slept a few hours. Nothing is more dangerous than an enemy with nothing to lose, he thought. Which is what I have become. Yesterday, he had had difficulty walking upright, but now he had moved confidently, held in place by his iron will. The pain his body sent him was defied and ignored. As he crept out of the house, he heard the murmur of two people talking. Curious, he stopped and listened. Elaine was saying in her gentle voice, Place to stay, we have room, Horace answered, inaudibly, in his bass rumble. Yes, the poor boy, replied Elaine. Oh wait, I had that backwards, but whatever. Just switch the voices. It's fine. This time, Eragon could hear Horace reply. Maybe. There was a long pause. I'm thinking about what Eragon said, and I'm not sure he told us everything. What do you mean? There was concern in her voice. When we started for their farm, the road was scraped smooth by the board he dragged Garrow on. Then we reached a place where the snow was all trampled and churned up. His footprints and signs at the board stopped there, but we also saw the same giant tracks from the farm. And what about his legs? I can't believe he didn't notice losing that much skin. I didn't want to push him for answers, but now I think I will. Maybe what he saw scared him so much that he doesn't want to talk about it, suggested Elaine. You saw how distraught he was. That still doesn't explain how he managed to get Garrow nearly all the way here without leaving any tracks. Saphira was right, thought Eragon. It's time to leave. Too many questions from too many people. Sooner or later they'll find the answers. He continued through the house, tensing whenever the floor creaked. The streets were clear. Few people were up at this time of day. He stopped for a minute and forced himself to focus. I don't need a horse. Saphira will be my steed, but she needs a saddle. She can hunt for both of us, so I don't have to worry about food. Though I should get some anyway. Whatever else I need I can find buried in our house. He went to Gedrick's tanning vats on the outskirts of Carvajal. The vile smell made him cringe, but he kept moving, heading for a shack set into the side of a hill, where the curled hides are stored. He cut down 3 large ox hides from the rows of skins hanging from the ceiling. The thievery made him feel guilty, but he reasoned, it's not really stealing. I'll pay Gedrick back someday. Along with Horst, he rolled up the thick leather and took it to a stand of trees away from the village. He wedged the hides between the branches of a tree, then returned to Carval. Now for food. He went to the tavern, intended to get it there, but then smiled tightly in reverse direction. If he was going to steal, it might as well be from Sloane. He sneaked up to the butcher's house. The front door was barred whenever Sloane was not there, but the side door was secured with only a thin chain, which he broke easily. The rooms inside were dark. He fumbled blindly until his hands came upon hard piles of meat wrapped in cloth. He stuffed as many of them as he could under his shirt, then hurried back to the street and furtively closed the door. A woman shouted his name nearby. He clasped the bottom of his shirt to keep meat from falling out and ducked behind a corner. He shivered as Horst walked between two houses, not 10 feet away. Eragon ran as soon as Horst was out of sight. His legs burned as he pounded down an alley and back to the trees. He slipped between the tree trunks, then turned to see if he was being pursued. No one was there. Relieved, he let out his breath and reached into the tree for the leather. It was gone. Going somewhere? Eragon whirled around. Brahm scowled angry at him. An ugly wound on the side of his head. A short sword hung at his belt in a brown sheath. The hides were in his hands. Eragon's eyes narrowed in irritation. How had the old man managed to sneak up on him? Everything had been so quiet. He would have sworn that no one was around. Give them back, he snapped. Why? So you can run off before Garrow is even buried? The accusation was sharp. It's none of your business, he barked, temper flashing. Why did you follow me? I didn't, grunted Brahm. I've been waiting for you here. Now where are you going? Nowhere. Eragon lunged for the skins and grabbed them from Brahm's hands. Brahm did nothing to stop him. I hope you have enough meat to feed your dragon. Eragon froze. What are you talking about? Brahm crossed his arms. Don't fool me. I know that mark on your hand, the Gedway Ignacia, the shining palm comes from. He's got the proper term. Oh, damn. You have touched a dragon hatchling. I know why you came to me with those questions, and I know that once more the riders live. Eragon dropped the leather and meat. It's finally happened. I have to get away. I can't run faster than him with my injured legs. But if... Saphira, he called. For a few agonizing seconds, she did not answer. But then... Yes? We've been discovered. I need you. He sent her a picture of where he was. And she took off immediately. Now, he just had to stall Brahm. How did you find out? He asked in a hollow voice. Hey, Joshma, welcome in, buddy. Hope you're doing well. Oh, snap! Thank you so much for the raid. Hey, I really appreciate it. Hope you're all doing well. Thanks for popping by. What were you playing today? I'm just reading Eragon. So, hate to say it, but possible spoilers. If you guys don't terribly mind, if you've seen the movie, it's not a huge deal. The movie covers this whole book. But, this is my second reading. We're about like 4 hours into the book so far. So if you want to catch up and catch the whole book, I would definitely suggest going to my YouTube. I got another video for this book. But we're on page 96 here. Nothing terribly major is happening, per se. But, yeah, you have been warned. But, more than welcome to be here. Appreciate all of you. You're playing Ogre Battle 64 is pretty interesting. I'll have to take a look at that. Is that like a 2D fighter? Sounds interesting. Okay, but to summarize for everybody coming in who does still want to hang out for a little bit with Joshua, basically we got Eragon right now. He's got a dragon. For reasons I won't get into, he's getting ready to leave town, so he's stolen a few supplies to, you know, feed his dragon. And leather to make a saddle so she doesn't scrape his legs. And this other guy, he was asking questions about dragons to Brahm, has caught on to him and has basically called him out for being a dragon rider. And now he's like, okay, well, I'm out. This is concerning. I don't want people to know about me. It's a strategy tactics style game. Oh, interesting. That's not what I was thinking of at all. Sounds neat. Have you ever played Yu-Gi-Oh! Falsebound Kingdom? Is it something like that? In that game you have like teams of 3. It's kind of like Final Fantasy combat. But like in between the combat, you kind of like move the teams around to try to like control a map. So he's calling to his dragon because they have like a mental link. We've been discovered. I need you. He sent her a picture of where he was and she took off immediately. Now he just had to stall Braum. How did you find out? Then he said, there were clues and hints everywhere. I had only to pay attention. Anyone with the right knowledge could have done the same. Tell me, how is your dragon? She, said Eragon, is fine. You weren't at the farm when the strangers came. Ah, your legs. You were flying? How did Braum figure that out? What if the strangers coerced him into doing this? Maybe they want him to discover where I'm going so they can ambush us. And where's Saphira? He reached out with his mind and found her circling overhead. Come. No, I will watch for a time. Why? Because of the slaughter of that Doru Araba. What? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. What? What does that mean? You never heard of it? You look it up? Awesome. Yeah, it was a GameCube game I really appreciated. Braum leaned against a tree with a slight smile. I have talked with her, and she has agreed to stay above us until we settle our differences. As you can see, you don't really have any choice but to answer my questions. Now tell me, where are you going? Oh, speaking of though, Eragon has a really cool PS2 game. That's definitely worth checking out as well. It's like an overhead hack and slash, kind of like the old Lord of the Ring games. Right? Yeah. One of those hidden gems for sure. Especially because it's like two different kinds of gameplay. Like I was saying, it's like a strategy game, but then it's also a turn-based fighter. I think you could even play it, there was like a survival mode, and I think also a PvP mode. Bewildered, Eragon put a hand to his temple. How could Braum speak to Saphira? The back of his head throbbed and ideas whirled through his mind, but he kept reaching the same conclusion. He had to tell the old man something. He said, I was going to find a safe place to stay while I heal. And after that? The question could not be ignored. The throbbing in his head grew worse. It was impossible to think. Nothing seemed clear. All he wanted to do was tell someone about the events of the past few months. It tore at him that his secret had caused Garrow's death. He gave up and said tremulously, I was going to hunt down the strangers and kill them. A mighty task for someone so young. Braum said in a normal tone, as if Eragon had proposed the most obvious and suitable thing to do. Certainly a worthy endeavor, and one you are fit to carry out, yet it strikes me that help would not be unwelcome. He reached behind a bush and pulled out a large pack. His tone became gruff. Anyway, I'm not going to stay behind while some stripling gets to run around with a dragon. Is he really offering help, or is it a trap? Are you going to go get some dinner? No worries, I really appreciate the raid once again, Joshma. Hope you enjoy your stay here. Eragon, oh, another thing I want to mention though is if you haven't seen the Eragon movie, it's really not that great. Not gonna lie to you. They cut a lot of the greatest elements of this book, to be honest, as far as like the theatrical things that happen, like the magic, and like even a lot of the secondary characters are missing, which is quite unfortunate. But I digress. Eragon was afraid of what his mysterious enemies could do, but Braum convinced Saphira to trust him, and they've talked through the mind touch. If she isn't worried, he decided to put his suspicions aside for the present. I don't need help, said Eragon, then grudgingly asked, but you can come. Oh, added, asked. Then we had best be going, said Braum. His face blanked for a moment. I think you'll find that your dragon will listen to you again. Saphira? Asked Eragon. Yes. He resisted to question her. Will you meet us at the farm? Yes. So you reached an agreement? I guess so. She broke contact and soared away. He glanced at Carvajal and saw people running from house to house. I think they're looking for me. Braum raised an eyebrow. Probably. Shall we go? Eragon hesitated. I'd like to leave a message for Roran. It doesn't seem right to run off without telling him why. It's been taken care of, assured Brom. I left a letter for him with Gertrude, explaining a few things. I also cautioned him to be on guard for certain dangers. Is that satisfactory? Eragon nodded. He wrapped the leather around the meat and started off. They were careful to stay out of sight until they reached the road, then quickened their pace, eager to distance themselves from Carvajal. Eragon plowed ahead, determinedly, his legs burning. The mindless rhythm of walking freed his mind to think. Once we get home, I won't travel any farther with Brom until I get some answers, he told himself firmly. I hope that he can tell me more about the riders and whom I'm fighting. As the wreckage of the farm came into view, Brom's eyebrows beetled with anger. Eragon was dismayed to see how swiftly nature was reclaiming the farm. Snow and dirt were already piled inside the house, concealing the violence of the attack. All that remained of the barn was a rapidly eroding rectangle of soot. Brom's head snapped up at the sound of Saphira's wings drifting over the trees. She dived past them from behind, almost brushing their heads. They staggered as a wall of air buffeted them. Saphira's scales glittered as she wheeled over the farm and landed gracefully. Brom stepped toward with an expression both solemn and joyous. His eyes were shining, and a tear shone on his cheek before it disappeared into his beard. He stood there for a long while, breathing heavily, as he watched Saphira and she him. Eragon heard him, muttering, and edged closer to listen. Sorry about that. So, it starts again. But how and where will it end? My sight is veiled. I cannot tell if this is tragedy or farce, for the elements of both are here. However it may be, my station isn't changed, and I, whatever else he might have said, faded away. Saphira proudly approached them. Eragon passed Brom, pretending he had heard nothing, and greeted her. There was something different between them now, as if they knew each other even more intimately. Yet were still strangers. He rubbed her neck, and his palm tingled as their minds touched. A strong curiosity came from her. I've seen no humans except you and Garrow, and he was badly injured, she said. You've seen people through my eyes. It's not the same. She came closer and turned her long head so that she could inspect Brom with one large blue eye. You really are queer creatures, she said critically, and continued to stare at him. Brom held still as she sniffed the air, and then he extended a hand to her. Saphira slowly bowed her head and allowed him to touch her on the brow. With a snort, she jerked back and retreated behind Eragon. Her tail flickered over the ground. What is it? He asked. She did not answer. Brom turned to him and asked in an undertone, What's her name? Saphira. A peculiar expression crossed Brom's face. He ground the butt of his staff into the earth with such force, his knuckles turned white. Of all the names you gave me, it was the only one she liked. I think it fits, Eragon added quickly. Fit it does, said Brom. There was something in his voice Eragon could not identify. Was it loss? Wonder? Fear? Envy? He was not sure. It could have been none of them or all. Brom raised his voice and said, Greetings, Saphira. I am honored to meet you. He twisted his hand in a strange gesture and bowed. I like him, said Saphira. Of course you do. Everyone enjoys flattery. Eragon touched her on the shoulder and went to the ruined house. Saphira trailed behind her with Brahm. The old man looked vibrant and alive. Eragon climbed into the house and crawled under a door into what was left of his room. He barely recognized it under the piles of shattered wood. Guided by memory, he searched where the inside wall had been and found his empty pack. Part of the frame was broken, but the damage could be easily repaired. He kept rummaging and eventually uncovered the end of his bow, which was still in its book skin tube. That was such a weird word for me. Struggling. Though the leather was scratched and scuffed, he was pleased to see that the oiled wood was unharmed. Finally, some luck. He strung the bow and pulled on the sinew experimentally. It bent smoothly, without any snaps or creaks. Satisfied, he hunted for his quiver, which he found buried nearby. Many of the arrows were broken. He unstrung the bow and handed it and the quiver to Brahm, who said, "It takes a strong arm to pull that." Eragon took the compliment silently. He picked through the rest of the house for other useful items and dumped the collection next to Brahm. It was a meager pile. "What now?" asked Brahm. His eyes were sharp and inquisitive. Eragon looked away. "We find a place to hide." "Do you have somewhere in mind?" "Yes." He wrapped all the supplies, except for his bow, into a tight bundle and tied it shut. Hefting it onto his back, he said, "This way," and headed into the forest. "Saphira, follow us in the air. Your footprints are too easily found and tracked." Very well. She took off behind them. Their destination was nearby, but Eragon took a circuitous route in an effort to baffle any pursuers. It was well over an hour before he finally stopped in a well-concealed bramble. The irregular clearing in the center was just large enough for a fire, 2 people, and a dragon. Red squirrels scampered into the trees, chattering in protest at their intrusion. Brahm extricated himself from a vine and looked around with interest. "Does anyone else know of this?" he asked. "No. I found it when we first moved here. It took me a week to dig into the center, and another week to clear out all the dead wood." Saphira landed beside them and folded her wings, careful to avoid the thorns. She curled up, snapping twigs with her hand, with her hard scales with her hands, yet her one hand, kind of odd, and rested her head on the ground. Unreadable eyes followed them closely. Brahm leaned against his staff. This might be my last chapter, honestly. I can already feel myself struggling to read. It's about how much I read last time, so I think this is just like the limit of my mind to take in text. Brahm leaned against his staff and fixed his gaze on her. His scrutiny made Eragon nervous. Eragon watched them until hunger forced him to action. He built a fire, filled a pot with snow, and then set it over the flames to melt. When the water was hot, he tore off chunks of meat and dropped them into the pot with a lump of salt. Not much of a meal, he thought grimly, but it'll do. I'll probably be eating this for some time to come, so I might as well get used to it. The stew simmered quietly, spreading a rich aroma through the clearing. The tip of Saphira's tongue snaked out and tasted the air. When the meat was tender, Brahm came over and Eragon served the food. They are silently avoiding each other's eyes. Afterward, Brahm pulled out his pipe and lit it leisurely. "Why do you want to travel with me?" asked Eragon. A cloud of smoke left Brahm's lips and spiraled up through the trees until it disappeared. "I have a vested interest in keeping you alive," he said. "What do you mean?" demanded Eragon. "To put it bluntly, I'm a storyteller, and I happen to think that you make a fine story. You're the first dragon rider. to exist outside the king's control for over 100 years. What will happen? Will you perish as a martyr? Will you join the Varden? Or will you kill King Galbatorix? All fascinating questions. And I will be there to see every bit of it, no matter what I have to do. And that formed in Eragon's stomach. He could not see himself doing any of those things, least of all becoming a martyr. I want my vengeance, but for the rest, I have no ambition. That may be, but tell me, how can you talk with Saphira? Brahm took his time putting more Cardis weed in his pipe. Once it was relit and firmly in his mouth, he said, "Very well. If it's answers you want, it's answers you'll get. But they may not be to your liking." He got up, brought his pack over to the fire, and pulled out a long object wrapped in cloth. It was about 3.5 feet long, and from the way he handled it, rather heavy. He peeled away the cloth, strip by strip, like a mummy being unswathed. Eragon gazed, transfixed, as a sword was revealed. The gold pommel was teardrop-shaped, the sides cut away to reveal a ruby the size of a small egg. The hilt was wrapped in a silver wire, burnished until it gleamed like starlight. The sheath was wine red and smooth as glass, adorned solely by a strange black symbol etched into it. Next to the sword was a leather belt with a heavy buckle. The last strip fell away, and Brahm passed the weapon to Eragon. Sorry about that. I was losing my voice. The handle fit Eragon's hand as if it had been made for him. He slowly drew the sword. It slid soundlessly from the sheath. The flat blade was iridescent red and shimmered in the firelight. The keen edges curved gracefully to a sharp point. A duplicate of the black symbol was inscribed on the metal. The balance of the sword was perfect. It felt like an extension of his arm, unlike the rude farm tools he was used to. An air of power lay over it, as if an unstoppable force resided in its core. It had been created for the violent convulsions of battle, to end men's lives, yet it held terrible beauty. "This was once a rider's blade," said Brahm gravely. "When a rider finishes his training, the elves would present him with a sword. Their methods of forging have always remained secret. However, their swords are eternally sharp and will never stain. The custom was to have the blade's color match that of the rider, but I think we can make an exception in this case. This sword is named Zarok. I don't know what it means. Probably something personal to the rider who owned it." He watched Eragon swing the sword. "I can tell you guys what Zarok means if you want." There's actually a picture of Zarok on the back of the book. You know, I'll just tell you. Zarok means murder. Dun 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 dun. It's a very ominous sword. Gonna find out how Brahm got a hold of it. "Where did you get it?" asked Eragon. He reluctantly slipped the blade back into the sheath and attempted to hand the sword back, but Brahm made no move to take it. "It doesn't matter," said Brahm. "I will only say that it took me a series of nasty and dangerous adventures to attain it. Consider it yours. You have more of a claim to it than I do, and before all is done, I think you will need it." The offer caught Eragon off guard. "It is a princely gift. Thank you." Sure of what to say, He slid his hand down the sheath. What is the symbol? That was the rider's personal crest. Eragon tried to interrupt, but Brahm glared at him until he was quiet. Now, if you must know, anyone can learn how to speak to a dragon if they have the proper training. And, he raised a finger for emphasis, it doesn't mean anything if they can. I know more about the dragons and their abilities than almost anyone else alive. On your own, it might take years to learn what I can teach you. I'm offering my knowledge as a shortcut. As for how I know so much, I will keep that to myself. Saphira pulled herself up as he finished speaking and prowled over to Eragon. He pulled out the blade and showed her the sword. It has power, she said, touching the point with her nose. The metal's iridescent color rippled like water as it met her scales. She lifted her head with a satisfied snort, and the sword resumed its normal appearance. Eragon sheathed it, troubled. Brahm raised an eyebrow. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. Dragons will constantly amaze you. Things happen around them. Mysterious things that are impossible anywhere else. Even though the riders worked with dragons for centuries, they never completely understood their abilities. Some say that even the dragons don't know the full extent of their own powers. They are linked with this land in a way that lets them overcome great obstacles. What Saphira just did illustrates my earlier point. There is much you just don't know. There's a long pause. That may be, but I can learn. And the strangers are the most important thing I need to know about right now. Do you have any idea who they are? Brahm took a deep breath. They are called the Razak. No one knows if that's the name of their race or what have chosen to call themselves. Either way, if they have individual names, they keep them hidden. The Razak were never seen before Galbatorix came to power. He must have found them during his travels and enlisted them in his service. Little or nothing is known about them. However, I can tell you this. They aren't human. When I glimpsed one's head, it appeared to have something resembling a beak and black eyes, as large as my fist. Though how they manage our speech is a mystery to me. Doubtless, the rest of their bodies are just as twisted. That is why they cover themselves with cloaks all the time, regardless of the weather. As for their powers, they are stronger than any man and can jump incredible heights, but they cannot use magic. Be thankful for that, because if they could, you would already be in their grasp. I already know they have a strong aversion to sunlight, though it won't stop them if they're determined. Don't make the mistake of underestimating a Razak, for they are cunning and full of guile. Sorry about that. We're almost done with this chapter, and then I'm going to close up. Because, yeah, it's definitely getting to me a little bit now here. How many of them are there? Asked Eragon, wondering how Brahm could possibly know so much. As far as I know, only the two you saw. There might be more, but I've never heard of them. Perhaps they're the last of a dying race. You see, they're the king's personal dragon hunters. Whenever rumors reach Galbatorix of a dragon in the land, he sends the Razak to investigate. A trail of death often follows them. Brahm blew a series of smoke rings and watched them float up between the brambles. Eragon ignored the rings until he noticed that they were changing color and darting around. Brom winked slyly. Eragon was sure that no one had seen Saphira, so how could Galbatorix have heard about her? When he voiced his objections, Brom said, "You're right. It seemed unlikely that anyone from Carvajal could have informed the king. Why don't you tell me where you got the egg, and how you raised Saphira? That might clarify the issue." Eragon hesitated, then recounted all the events since he had found the egg in the spine. It felt wonderful to finally confide in someone. Brom asked a few questions, but most of the time, he listened intently. The sun was about to set when Eragon finished his tale. Both of them were quiet as the clouds turned a soft pink. Eragon eventually broke the silence. "I just wish I knew where she came from, and Saphira doesn't remember." Brom cocked his head. "I don't know, you've made things clear to me. I'm sure that no one besides us has seen Saphira. The Razak must have had a source of information outside of this valley. One who's probably dead by now. You have had a hard time and done much. I'm impressed." Eragon stared blankly into the distance, then asked, "What happened to your head? It looked like you were hit with a rock." "No, but that's a good guess." He took a deep pull on the pipe. "I was sneaking around the Razak camp what I could, when they surprised me, and I managed to drive them away. Not, however," he said wryly, "without this token of my stupidity. Stunned, I fell to the ground and didn't regain consciousness until the next day. By then, they had already arrived at your farm. It was too late to stop them, but I set out after them anyway. That's when we met on the road." Who is he to think that he could take on the Razak alone? They ambushed him in the dark and he was only stunned. Unsettled, Eragon asked hotly, "When you saw the mark, the Gedway and Ignatia, on my palm, why didn't you tell me who the Razak were? I would have warned Garo instead of going to Saphira first, and the three of us could have fled." Brom sighed. "I was unsure of what to do at the time. I thought I could keep the Razak away from you, and once they had left, confront you about Saphira. But they outsmarted me. It's a mistake that I deeply regret, and one that has cost you dearly." "Who are you?" demanded Eragon, suddenly bitter. "How come a mere villager, a storyteller, happens to have a rider's sword? How do you know about the Razak?" Brom tapped his pipe. "Made it clear I wasn't going to talk about that. My uncle is dead because of this. Dead. I've treated you this fair. I've trusted you this far because Saphira respects you, but no more. You're not the person I know in Carvajal all these years. Explain yourself." For a long time, Brom stared at the smoke swirling between them, deep lines creasing in his forehead. When he stirred, it was only to take another puff. Finally, he said, "You've probably never thought about it, but most of my life has been spent outside of Palancar Valley. It was only in Carvajal that I took up the mantle of storyteller. I have played many roles to different people. I have a complicated past. It was partially through a desire to escape it that I came here. So no, I'm not the man you think I am." "Ha!" snorted Eragon. "Then who are you?" Brom smiled gently. "I am one who is here to help you. Do not scorn those words. They are the truest I have ever spoken. But I'm not going to answer your questions. At this point, you don't need to hear my history, nor have you earned that right. Yes, I have knowledge. Brom the storyteller wouldn't. But I'm more than he. You'll have to learn to live with that fact, and the fact that I don't hand out descriptions of my life to anyone who asks." Eragon glared at him sullenly. "I'm going to sleep," he said, leaving the fire. Brom did not seem surprised, but there was sorrow in his eyes. He spread his bedroll next to the fire as Eragon lay beside Saphira. An icy silence fell over the camp. With that, we're gonna wrap it up for the night.